Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. We're going to be talking about sustainable energy storage with my guest, Andrew Sispoidis. He is the CEO of Carbon Ion Energy. He has formerly been the managing partner with De Beer Capital Partners, a senior advisor in future technology and transformative development for DGT Global. He was formerly president and CEO of Tone Mobile and former senior advisor for Co-Rise Company, managing partner with Kinismos, and a board member of Agatho. He was also founder and senior advisor for the Center for Global Information Security. He has won many awards, including the Innovator Award by the Connecticut Technology Council and the MIT Enterprise Forum. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Nancy, thank you for having me on the show.
You have been involved in many different aspects of the energy market, but you are most concerned now about making our energy more sustainable, especially by providing batteries that don't pollute, that don't use rare earth minerals, that are much better to use in terms of recycling and not having fire risks. What is the difference between a carbon ion battery and a lithium and cobalt-based battery?
It's a great question, and many people ask it, and the reality is that what carbon ion is essentially a supercapacitor, and that makes it very different than what we typically know of as a battery. A supercapacitor is essentially, yes, it is a chemical process, but at the same time, the way we're formulating the technology itself, there are no rare earth metals, there are no rare earth elements of any kind. It is very clean in terms of the electrolyte that we use. So essentially the solution that we actually create allows us to take a very, very fast charge and then also be able to discharge very quickly. And there's great applications for that in the energy storage side, meaning on the infrastructure side. But essentially, carbon ion is a supercapacitor, and there have been supercapacitors the past several years that have been reaching the marketplace. But the way we're formulating it, it allows for us to have a broader spectrum in terms of the applications as the research and development team furthers this development.
How do you explain a supercapacitor?
A supercapacitor is an energy storage device that can charge extremely quickly and discharge extremely quickly in ways that a traditional battery as we know them today couldn't. In trying to do so with a traditional battery, you're very likely to create a scenario where there's a fire or they become much more volatile and you reduce the charging cycles. So supercapacitors have this consistency. They can last for a very long time and be able to take that energy in and push it out quickly.
Your company creates batteries that don't use rare earth materials. Current batteries like lithium and cobalt do, and they also are a challenge to source, difficult to recycle, have fire risk. How does carbon ion batteries compare in terms of sourcing the materials? Where do you get the materials? What are the materials? Are they being recycled? Why are they not a fire risk too?
Nancy, that's a great question. Essentially, carbon ion technology is fundamental in many ways, meaning that it's relatively straightforward. We're actually using carbon, literally high surface area carbon, that's very proprietary in terms of how it's made. An electrolyte, it's water-based electrolyte, so there's nothing that's flammable, nothing that's toxic. It's recyclable at end of life, and it has a lot longer life cycle as well. Hundreds of thousands of charge and discharge cycles versus thousands of discharge cycles. So it's order of magnitude and perhaps more. So materials that we're using are completely recyclable. It's water that's inert, but it is safe. And then beyond that, it's in electrolytes within that compound, and then also high surface area carbon.
There is a movement to try and get electric vehicles. The problem in the past is that they haven't been able to go very far without being charged, or the batteries take so much space, or aren't necessarily that ecological in and of itself. So how do you provide the sustainable power from power grids for aviation and heavy transportation and warehouse robotics?
Again, another great question. We play an interesting role. What's happening today is that the grids were never developed for alternative energy sources. Essentially, when you look at wind power or solar power, they're not as as consistent as having traditional power from a coal-fired plant, as an example. And that's a very dirty example, but that's kind of still used in the world today. As the grid has evolved and renewables have come into the system, what happens is that there are spikes in the system and there are drops in the system that cause brownouts, cause blackouts, cause surges in the system as a whole. So as more electric vehicles come onto the market, what ends up happening is that the draw at certain times of day, as an example, in California in particular, the draw at a particular time of day when everyone gets off of work, they come home, they charge their vehicles, is an extraordinary draw that happens on the system that hasn't been accounted for in the development of it. Where we play a role is we're able to sit places in the power grid, essentially interim points along the way, and allow for what we call fast frequency response. Essentially the power that comes over the pipes, essentially the electric circuitry. You think of it like water. So if a lot of water comes through, and if we have a reserve and the water is coming through at a certain frequency, what happens is that if it gets interrupted as far as that frequency is concerned, then further down the line, meaning power plants and factories can be overcharged and damage the equipment. Transformers can blow up, get brownouts, things like that. We can sit in the middle of all that and provide an even, very consistent power and be able to draw from the carbon ion energy storage and deliver that very, very smoothly.
You have been involved in so many companies in terms of leadership and innovation and entrepreneurship, cybersecurity, transformative future technologies. Now you have a company focusing on these batteries. What's the competition? How many other companies are out there?
It's a great question. And the segment that we're focusing on with carbon ion is one where in the near-term future, meaning I'm looking at a 10-year time horizon, there will be a number of players that come into the marketplace. We happen to be at the vanguard of that at this point. We're early in the process in that there are not too many players actually active in the industry. There are some supercapacitor companies that are out there. There are some companies looking at energy storage. However, we are early enough to be able to kind of set the tone.
What is the financial investment in doing this?
So essentially, we're in the process right now of doing a fundraise. Long term, there will be tens of millions invested of future generations of carbon ion technology. Up until now, over $30 million has been invested in the technology itself from its earliest stage. We actually acquired that technology after that investment had been made, and we are now bringing it to market as carbon ion, with Oxeon being our UK laboratory.
You mentioned the United Kingdom. Is Europe doing more, or are their tax laws better to be working over there than in the United States? But you are a U.S. company.
We are a U.S. company, primarily for access to a very big market. However, the R&D that's being done in energy technology, essentially batteries, as you know, lithium-ion batteries were invented within a couple of miles of where we have our facilities in the UK. The UK has actually been very forward-thinking around energy in general, but certainly about energy storage. From a brain trust perspective, we're near a major university, Oxford University.
Environmentalists have been advocating sustainable energy for decades. Now, because climate crisis is on the global scene, companies like yours are trying to do new innovative technologies to help solve that problem. But are you working with the traditional fossil fuel companies, the oil companies, to get them involved in making the transition? Because we still need fossil fuels and the transition isn't happening fast enough. You would think that they would want to be investing and engaging in research and development in the sustainable energy field. How are companies like you working with the traditional companies?
There is a major transition happening. It will take some time. We all know that. And we all know that, it's not going to be a smooth curve. There's going to be some interruptions along the way and unforeseen circumstances that develop. However, the transition is absolutely happening. It's necessary. At this point, it becomes a bit of an unstoppable train. We are very happy to work with any company. In the energy space overall, the way to look at it really is energy as a whole is a hybrid system. We'll play a role within that hybrid system. As the energy sector evolves, the primary type of energy and where it's being drawn from, generated, distributed, how it's being distributed, and all of that, essentially we'll be able to shift among all those various hybrid technologies. So we are one piece of a very, very complicated puzzle, but we believe we're actually a very essential piece as we move towards more electrification. because we can actually smooth those curves out to allow for a quickly discharge and charge and essentially create situations where even lithium-ion batteries could work better. We look at ourselves as being able to enhance the entire system, make everything else work better.
You have also worked with other technologies around the world, including trying to provide mobile broadband service to over 3 billion underserved people. And when we look at Africa and Asia, South America, Caribbean, Pacific, these are places that don't have the same kind of infrastructure as Europe or America, and they definitely need to have new kinds of technology. Are they bypassing some of the traditional polluting technologies and going forward with the new technologies that you can offer?
It's interesting that you mentioned, I've worked in Africa as an example. The great news there is that typically because they haven't developed in some of these areas, particularly having a massive energy grid and infrastructure established, there's an opportunity to actually exactly as you described. There's a leapfrog opportunity. We saw it in the mobile space. In fact, Africa led mobile payments well before Apple Pay and all those systems came into play in the West, essentially, in North America and Europe. They were using mobile phones to pay for services a decade ago. So there's actually kind of innovation that does leapfrog when we're dealing with developing markets like that.
You are focused on providing lithium-free, next-generation, capacitive energy storage. When is it going to be common, normal? When are we going to see the switch?
If we're talking about reaching a level of normalcy, meaning that it's endemic, that it's existing within the system across a broad spectrum of geographies and systems as a whole, we're talking probably a couple of decades. But at the same time, that acceleration, the curve is going to accelerate very quickly. So over the next decade, there's no question in my mind that electrification will be relatively endemic. Policy plays a role. I think capital plays a role. I think that the acceptance from an industry perspective, technology and the acceptance of new technologies into existing systems will also play a role. And those are big ships to maneuver, but they're absolutely orienting in the right direction. So it'll take time, and no question about that, but it's starting to happen.
Are the various industry sectors equally engaged? Is it transportation or manufacturing? Where are the changes happening faster?
We all hear about transportation. We all hear about electric vehicles, heavy vehicles. But right now, the space that's gained the popularity and really has done incredible good for the world in this regard is the electric vehicle space. And then the charging stations that go along with that, and then the infrastructure that sits behind that. So they're all kind of dependent on each other.
Do we have enough laws in place? Do we have enough government subsidies and tax incentive programs to make it happen or even encourage it to happen faster?
Policy in general, incentive, I think that it can stimulate things. Industry has to drive it, and then demand has to drive that, and the case has to be made economically. But that case, at this point, we're seeing that we're very vulnerable in the world. And energy as a whole, an infrastructure basis, is exceedingly vulnerable. As a result of that, prices are very volatile, and right now they're very high. The high prices actually help drive this kind of innovation. Even over a long period of time, we're actually building that momentum. So those policies and those incentives actually coming at this time, they're very beneficial. They can't drive it long term, but they can really kickstart things. And I think that they're actually going to do that.
You're doing some wonderful work, and I wish you well in having sustainable energy with us faster. I certainly appreciate the update on what is happening in this field. Thank you so very much for being my guest.
Nancy, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have any other questions or anything, I'm always happy to speak with you.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Andrew Sispoidis, who is CEO of Carbon Ion Energy. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.